So remember this morning when I talked about the principles in the Declaration of Independence and then the preamble to the Constitution and how they underpin everything. You'll notice, well, you won't notice it yet, I'm not starting with the preamble. We're going to go straight into Article 1. But keep in mind that everything in the Constitution should be evaluated in light of the principles in the Declaration and the preamble. Okay? And then for the Bill of Rights, you also add in the preamble to the Bill of Rights. So, the declarations and preambles, is it true? Is it supported by natural law? Is it congruent with God's word, or is it in conflict with it? Work out the questions yourselves. Always ask when there's criticism, cui bono, who benefits? So by taking the Constitution and denigrating it, who is the beneficiary of getting you to disrespect the Constitution? Hint, it's not you. All right? And consider how the choices made in the structure of the government, in the wording that they chose, consider how the choices that they made support the principles that underlie the Constitution. What were the founders trying to do? What principles did they want to build on? What were the geopolitical realities? We talked about these this morning. 4 years after the Treaty of Paris, 10 years into the federated government under the Articles of Confederation that were falling apart. Britain, France, and Spain watching and waiting to see if we got weak enough that they could just swoop in and take the territory for themselves. So they needed to figure out how to remain free and independent states with a federal government that was strong enough to stand firm and protect the states against very real external threats. But the states still needed to be separate. They wanted to be separate. They did not want to be a country. They wanted to be states confederated. So there's a balance point between these conflicts. And the Constitution was trying to find that balance point so it doesn't go one way or the other. So Article 1 is the longest article in the Constitution. Article 2 is the second longest. They create the legislative and the executive branches of the federal government. They delineate the levels of power that can be exercised in those sections of government. They define the powers that the federal government may exercise. And there's a hierarchy. The people and the states are always to come first in all considerations, and the federal comes last. And the purpose of the federal is to support the people and the states. The people are sovereign. The people hold sovereign power. Not a king, not a cadre of small, powerful people, not a theocracy where God is at top, but the people are holding sovereign power. They band together into civil polities, and those are called states. They're usually based on a common ground of religion. That's how different nations have different reasons they've come together. Our states came together usually based on a religion. Virginia was founded on the Anglican religion, and the Pennsylvania was founded on the Quaker religion, and all the colonies had their own established religions. The day-to-day governance, the rules that you'd see in your day-to-day life, which today would be things like speed limits and zoning laws and all the rest of that, those would be local and state. So the government that you would see day to day would be local and state only, and the federal was something you'd barely notice. You'll see later on that one of the few areas that the federal government impinges on individuals is when they declare bankruptcy, or if they want to mail a letter. Maybe you want to mail a letter to your lawyer saying you're bankrupt. You were supposed to laugh at that. Wake up. Thank you. He who laughs last probably didn't get the joke. So the federal government level is outward facing. International relations, defense of all the colonies as a whole, or the states as a whole, dealing with trade internationally, and the president is the figurehead for foreign envoys. Because if you have an ambassador come from Spain, you can't meet him with the heads of all the states. That's ridiculous. You have a figurehead who's the president. The inward-facing functions of the federal government, meaning the ones facing into the country, were things like inter- and intra-state issues, such as making sure that contracts were enforced, making sure that trade is being handled fairly, making sure that $1 in Massachusetts is the same thing as $1 in New York is the same thing as $1 in Georgia, making sure that a pound in New York is the same as a pound in South Carolina. All sorts of stuff like that. So Article 1, Section 1. Power is vested or assigned to Congress. Okay? Lord Monckton had us talk the first sentence of Article 1. Somebody want to read it? Out loud? Sure.
All legislative powers herein granted shall be...
You need to enunciate to the back row.
Stand up. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in the Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives.
Okay, all legislative powers herein granted. Who's doing the granting? The people in the states are granting the power to the federal government, and that power is going to be vested, which is assigned to Congress. Vested is a very special word. It means I'm giving you something and you can't give it away. If your parents vest their stock options at work, it means they get them and nobody else. So when power is vested in Congress, that's their responsibility, their power, their control. And they do not have the authority to say to an unregulated, unelected agency, you go investigate this and make the rules and enforce them. This is your job. They do not have that authority because the legislative power is granted and then vested in Congress. Gee, changes the landscape of Washington a little if we paid attention to that, huh? The power is split. The House of Representatives is to protect the interests of the people, and the Senate is to protect the interest of the states. Remember, this was not supposed to be a nation. It was supposed to be a confederation of states banded together to work together internationally and for common defense and some other reasons. The Senate, because it's the representative of the needs and prerogatives of the states, shares some of the executive powers with the executive branch of the federal government. So this is the advice and consent, right? They advise on treaties, they advise on court appointments, they advise on Supreme Court, they advise on ambassadors. All those things that a head of state would say, you're going to be an ambassador, you're going to be a judge, we're going to make a treaty with you. The states get a say in through the Senate. So choosing of representatives is Article 2, Section 2. Remember again, the people hold sovereign power. The people pay the taxes that support the government functions. Right? That's what the people do. They hold office, the representatives hold office for only 2 years. So their loyalties, their term of office is short, their loyalties are to remain back home with their neighbors. They're not supposed to go to Congress and be there for 40 years and have a mansion in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and a house back in Malden, Massachusetts with a water bill of $11 a year, which is a dripping sink. That's a real case, Senator Markey. We got more weather alerts from someone's phone. So representatives hold office for only 2 years. Their loyalties are supposed to remain home with their neighbors. And the House is in charge of bringing all charges of impeachment, president, judges, whoever needs to be impeached, the House brings the charges. That's all they do. They bring the charges. Article 1, Section 2 also contains the 3/5 clause that the left always brings up as proof that the Constitution is pro-slavery and black people were only worth 3/5 of a person, and this is proof that the Constitution is racist and horrible and should just be thrown out. Nonsense. It was the slave-owning states that wanted all the slaves to be counted for the purposes of assigning the number of representatives in the House. Yeah, the slave-owning states wanted them all to be counted. Why? Well, the slaves don't vote. If you count all of them, that gives the voting population of the slave-owning states much more political power than they otherwise would have. The North, which is where the 4, at the time, free states were located, they wanted none of the slaves to be counted for the purpose of assigning representatives. Because they figured if these people can't vote, they shouldn't be counted for assigning representatives. That's not fair. The compromise was to take the whole number of slaves and use 3/5 of that number for 2 functions. To help in determining the number of representatives for the state with the slave population, and also to assign taxes, because taxation at first was what they call direct apportionment. Basically, you figure it out by population. So if you got 100 people out of 1,000, you got 10% of the population, you're going to pay 10% of the tax. So the compromise here was, we're going to let you count 3/5 of them towards your representatives, but that same 3/5 of the total number is going to add to your tax bill. So what, of course, did the South do? They cheated on their taxes. And after the Civil War, when all the slave populations were freed and they were counted, there were millions more than anybody had any idea of, because they were cheating on their taxes by not counting them, because that's what people do. So that 3/5 clause is actually an abolitionist clause. And it also shows you that they tied together very early this idea that if you want a say in government, you're going to pay for it. You want a voice, you pay the tax. In this section, it specifically says, excluding Indians not taxed. So if you were an Indian living in an Indian nation, not subject to federal control, not subject to tax, you didn't get a representative because you weren't paying. Not part of us, not being representative, not paying, or not paying, not getting a representative. So if you want a voice in government, you pay your tax. All right, moving on to choosing the senators. The senators were not just another house with a 6-year term that represents the people of the states. That's what it is now after the 17th Amendment. The initial idea of the Senate was they were the ambassadors representing the interests of the states at the level of the federal government. So if a law passed the House that impinged on areas reserved for state control, the senators would say, no, that's going no farther, because this is our business, not the federal government's business. And they were checks and balances, they were to stop that. After the 17th Amendment, they kind of lost interest in doing that because the states were no longer choosing them, but rather the people. So their job was to be ambassadors from the states to the federal government, safeguard the interests of the states as co-rulers of this confederation, safeguard the interests of the states as sovereign entities. They were given a term of office of 6 years to take sort of a long view of policy, a long view of the interests of the states and the federal government both. And then, remember we said the House of Representatives brings charges of impeachment. But it's the Senate that tries all cases. So they have like a trial with witnesses and testimonies and the rest. The House brings the charges, the Senate tries the case. And one of the things for you to think of and look up, because you can find why they did this, why they split those functions. What was the purpose? What was the principle? What was the safeguard they were building into the structure by splitting, bringing charges, and trying the case? And I'm not going to tell you. Article 1, Sections 4 and 5. Section 4 gives the states the job of figuring out the details of how they're going to choose their representatives and senators. You know, at this point, they've pretty much all do it in very similar ways. But at the start, there were 13 different experiments. We're going to do it this way. We're going to do it that way. Ooh, that seems to work better. Hey, guys, see what they're doing? Let's do that. That worked better. So they had different ways, and they changed those ways and adjusted them. And those were given to the states. The people elect the representatives. Initially, the legislatures of the states pick the senators. There is a requirement that Congress meets at least once a year. Now you can't pry them out with a shoehorn. But there's a requirement that they meet at least once a year. So does that tell you something about how big a job the founders thought this was going to be? Hey guys, you got to meet once this year. Come on, it's like November. Get a move on, go. It doesn't seem to indicate that they thought that this was like a full-time permanent job, huh? Why? Why? Think about why. Section 5 assigns to each house, the House of Representatives and the Senate, the duty to control its own functions, set its own rules for procedures and votes and all that stuff, and requires each house to keep its own records. That's the congressional record. It is available. It's public document. So that's a requirement according to the Constitution. Article 1, Section 6 gives rules for the compensation of legislators. They can't get a pay raise during the term they're in office. The increase, if they vote themselves an increase, it can only go into effect in the next term. Now, if this was supposed to be a part-time job, you did your shift and went home. In theory, it'd be the next guys coming in who saw the pay raise. Now, with people getting reelected so often, they get themselves a pay raise. They just have to wait till the next election to do it. They are privileged from arrest while serving, which means that if there's a Congress critter who's at home and gets drunk at a bar, and he can't be arrested for drunkenness, right? Things like that. If it's a felony, if it's a breach of the peace, he gets drunk, he goes out and picks a fight with someone. Or if it's treason, they can be arrested. Otherwise, while they're in office, while they're serving, no arrest. Why did they make that rule? What happened during the time we were still colonies of Britain to our representatives, to the Continental Congresses, that made them put this provision in? There's reasons. Go look them up. Another provision is that while they are in office serving, that's the only office they can hold. You can't be a judge and a representative. You can't be a senator and a dog catcher. One office at a time. Article 1, Section 7 gives the line of command for raising taxes and spending money. There are three groups that act. The people is their money that's going to get spent. So their representatives have to initiate the spending of money. So any bill, any law that includes spending of money for any reason has to start in the House of Representatives because it's their neighbors' money they're proposing to spend. The neighbors who are going to be mad at them when they go home unless they have a real good reason. But those bills that include spending money affect the states. So the states have to agree. And the Senate gets to propose changes. This is pretty good. We don't like this here. Can you change that a little bit? Sure, we can change. Once the House and the Senate both agree, then it goes to the president. The president gets a chance to sign it. He gets a chance to veto it, which basically says, I ain't going to sign this. This is not good. No, absolutely not. Or he can refuse to act, which is called a pocket veto, which basically is a veto that he doesn't have to put his name to. It's like, I'll put this in my back pocket, and when the time, I think it's 10 days, but I could be wrong on that, when that elapses, it's as if I signed it no. So sign, approve, reject, or ignore it until it gets rejected automatically. Then, if it's vetoed, Congress can try and see if they can gather enough votes to override, and it has to be a supermajority. You can look up the numbers. Article 1, Section 8. This is one of my favorite parts of the Constitution because it delineates almost all the specific powers that are vested, remember that word again, vested in the legislature. That power is granted by us and vested in the legislature. These are the only areas where Congress is authorized to act. And everything else they do that is not specifically authorized is a usurpation of power that has not been granted. And if we knew the Constitution, those would be null, void, and of no effect. The powers include the power to tax, the power to borrow money, the power to regulate commerce among nations, states, and tribes. Remember what we talked about this morning? To regulate in 1787 meant to make regular, basically a level playing field. All right? Regulating commerce among nations, so there's the international view. Between the states, because, and you can go look up the problems that states had with commerce under the Articles of Confederation, and with the Indian tribes. Congress is specifically given power over naturalization. Who can come into this country to live, to become a citizen, and under what conditions? Congress, not the executive. So all the screaming a while ago about President Trump overturning DACA. DACA was unconstitutional from the start because the previous administration had no authorization under the Constitution to act. That's the job of Congress and Congress alone. President Trump was simply undoing an error of the prior administration, and of course, they vilify him for it. Bankruptcy law. Bankruptcy law comes under the federal. So if somebody that you or your family knows has claimed bankruptcy, it's under federal law, not states, federal. The standard weights and measures. How much is a pound? How long is a mile? How long is a second? All the standard weights and measures, those are under federal control. Coining money, federal control. Punishing counterfeiters, well, that's kind of the other side to coining money, right? If we're in charge of the money, then if somebody is making fake money, it's our job to punish them. That makes sense, right? Post offices and post roads. Why would the federal level be given that? Because a lot of post goes between the states, right? So that's an appropriate place for their power. Patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Federal control. So we have the U.S. Patent Office instead of the Massachusetts Patent Office and the Vermont Patent Office and the Pennsylvania Patent Office. No, Federal Patent Office. And the lower courts. Congress can create lower courts as they think are needed. They also are granted the power to punish piracy and other crimes at sea. Congress is given the power to declare war, not the president. Congress declares war. They also can grant letters of marque and reprisal. And those really cool things. What's a letter of marque and reprisal? Who likes James Bond? All right. James Bond operates under letters of marque and reprisal. Here's something we need doing. Go do it. We will not ask any questions. We just want it done. Congress issues those. Congress also, again under the heading of declaring war, they make the rules on captures. They're in charge of the army, but no appropriation for army funds is for longer than 2 years. Why? Why? They don't want a standing army. A standing army can be a danger to the civilian population. They also get charge of the Navy, but any money that they get for the Navy does not necessarily have a 2-year limit on the expenditure. Why? Navy isn't much danger to a civilian population unless you live on the harbor, right? All right. They're in charge of the military. They call forth the militia, but the states appoint the officers. So Congress can pass a rule saying all the militia has to come out and train the third Saturday of every month. They have to have a rifle of at least this quality, and they have to train at least 4 times a year in order to be staying in the militia. But the officers are from the states. Congress is also given the authority to rule over the area that became Washington, D.C., the capital area. They also rule over, forts and magazines, and magazines like where they store ammunition, not the kind that you read. Dockyards, customs offices. Basically, if it's under federal control, Congress controls it. And my little thing. All other necessary and proper laws in order to carry out their duties on this slide and the prior one. Article 1, Section 9. Very interesting one. They promise not to end slavery before 1808. How come? Why then? 1787. How long is it to 1808? It's 21 years. It's a generation. They knew that slavery was wrong. They could not go forward as a country ripping apart the economic underpinnings of 9 of the 13 colonies. They compromised saying, okay, we won't put an end to it before 1808. You got 21 years to get ready. That didn't work as planned, in part because of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, and in part because Congress authorized the spread of slavery to other new states. But where's the authorization? Where do we grant them the power to do that? If someone can find it, I'd like to know, because I can't find it. There should have been no new slave-owning states. All right. So the Declaration implicitly states this is a repugnant and immoral practice. And there's also a direct addressing of abuses and problems under the Articles of Confederation or under the King. Article 9 includes habeas corpus, show me the body of evidence, not the dead body. Ex post facto laws mean you do it today and it's legal, and tomorrow they pass a law saying it's illegal, so they go back and arrest you. It's like, if it was legal when you did it, you can't be arrested for it. Titles. Our friend Lord Monckton has been here. You can't be a lord in the United States. You can only be an earl or a duke if that's your name. All right? No unauthorized spending. All spending has to be authorized by a bill. And it also talks about the treatment of states. Article 1, Section 10 limits a few areas of state power. The states agree to give up some of their sovereign power to the federal government in exchange for being part of this confederation. The international view, the view from outside in, is that we're one country. So we have the same money, we're all under the same treaties, we're all under the same trading rules. The states agree that they're not going to act on their own with other countries. They're going to toe the line and treat other countries the way the federal government says we treat them. The states also agree that they're not going to impose tariffs on goods from other states. So they can't treat the other states as if they were foreign countries and say, you know, we got an import duty and you have to pay in order to bring your stuff in here. They can, if they need to do inspections and make sure that the emerald ash borer is a huge problem in Worcester. We're going to inspect wood coming in to make sure there's no emerald ash borer. They can charge for those inspection costs. The states also agree that they're not going to give any titles of nobility, and they're not going to have their own armies. Yes, they have the militia. No, they are not going to have a professional army, because remember, the militia trains regularly, but then the guys go and do their regular jobs. An army, their job is to be the army. Article 2, the second longest article in the Constitution. This is the executive branch. The overall intent is for the president to function as a national level hired town manager, not a king. We don't elect a king, we elect a town manager for a really big town. The legislature, which is, you know, the town council or the selectmen equivalent, they make the rules. The manager, nationally that's the president, his job is to ensure that the rules are carried out properly. And if a rule slips by that's unconstitutional, it's also his job to make sure it doesn't get carried out. He's also the face to meet other heads of state or ambassadors. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ambassador. I'm the president. Power is, here's that word again, vested in the president. So his power cannot be delegated to anybody else either. He can ask for help, but his is the job to actually do the work. His term of office is for 4 years, so twice as long as a representative and 2/3 as long as a senator. So we keep, you know, there's a mismatch, and they keep changing and new faces come in. That's also on purpose. Think about why. Then we have this one. There was all this screaming in 2016 about, oh, you know, the popular vote went this way, but the Electoral College went the other way, and that's not fair, and we need to have a national election. No, the people don't elect the president. The states elect the president. Why do the states elect the president, not the people? Think about that. What's the job of the president? How does it interact with the states? Why is it important that the states elect that executive instead of the people? And what does happen if the people try and choose? The people are more likely to be manipulated by groups. Happens with states too, but this was the thought. People are more likely to be manipulated than an entire state. What if Congress chooses? Because under the Articles of Confederation, Congress chose the president every year, every term. They could choose somebody who's just going to say, yeah guys, whatever you want, ka-chunk, rubber stamp it. So they thought up the Electoral College. The electors, who were the men who were going to choose the president, were supposed to be chosen by the states for their wisdom, their abilities, their personal virtue. and they should be able to choose one man best able to carry out the duties of the president. Each state gets the number of electors based on their total representatives in Congress. So 2 senators and at least 1 representative, which is like Rhode Island only has 1. But if you've got 30 representatives, then you have 32 votes in the Electoral College. Now, why did they want this strange Electoral College with this weird voting in order to choose a president? They wanted to make sure that the president would be acceptable across states with very varied interests. The interests of Iowa are very different from the interests of Georgia, which are different from the interests of Arizona. The president has to appeal and be acceptable to states with wildly different needs and interests. Article 2, Section 1, continuing. There is a requirement for the president to be a natural-born citizen of this country. Natural-born citizen is talked about extensively in Emer de Vatel's Law of Nations. In 1758, it was first published, and it lays out the rules for natural-born citizen. Ben Franklin owned 3 different copies of that book, just himself. Born in the country or outside of the country of parents who are citizens. Children follow the condition of their fathers, and the country of the father is the country of the children. So, if you are born in the United States of parents who are U.S. citizens, you are a U.S. citizen, natural born. If you are born in the United States of parents who are citizens of Poland, you are a Polish citizen, even though you were born here. If you are born in Poland of citizens who are U.S. citizens, you are a natural-born U.S. citizen. The citizenship of the parents, specifically the father. And why specifically the father? Go look up coverture. C-O-V-E-R-T-U-R-E. That'll tell you why. Citizen of the father's country, regardless of birthplace. The place of birth matters if only the father is foreign. You can go look it up yourself. That gets into the minutia. Okay? Law of Nations, Emer de Vatel describes in great detail how you are a natural-born citizen. Continuing Article 2, Section 1, the president's pay can't be changed during his term in office, just like for Congress. An oath of office is required for the president to preserve, protect, and defend the United States, the people of the United States, the office of the president, the Congress. No. Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Why preserve, protect, and defend a document? What is the purpose of swearing allegiance and an oath to the idea of the Constitution? And when does that oath expire? Or is it for life? There's a similar oath that is sworn by all federal officers and most state and local officers down to the local police and fire. Why? Think about it, research it, I'm not going to tell you. Article 2, Section 2. Detail the duties of the president as the commander-in-chief. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, including the militia, if they are called into service to defend the country. The president may require written opinions. Remember, his duties are vested. His powers are vested. So he has to exercise them. That doesn't mean he has time to research everything. So he can say, can you go look into that for me and bring me a report? 2 weeks. Got it? All right. So, written opinions, written advice, written information. He can require it. He can grant reprieves and pardons, but not in cases of impeachment. He can appoint lower-level officials, and he can appoint vacancies in a recess, but those are limited in the length of time that they can stay in the office. He has duties where final approval is shared with the Senate, when he makes treaties with other nations, when he's appointing ambassadors, when he's nominating Supreme Court judges, and when he's appointing public ministers and consuls. This is one of those shared sovereignty areas. All right, Article 2, Section 3. The President is required to report to Congress from time to time. That has devolved into the kabuki theater known as the State of the Union Address. He's required to be the official greeter, meeter, and receiver of ambassadors from other countries. He is required to faithfully execute the constitutional laws of the country. Remember, his job is to make sure everything's done according to law, when those laws that are themselves constitutional. He commissions all officers. He convenes or adjourns Congress on extraordinary occasions. Not defined. You can look them up when he's done that. The President, the Vice President, and all civil officers shall, remember our discussion of shall earlier today, shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of, not just impeachment, but impeachment and conviction of treason. That sounds like a good reason to get somebody out of office. Bribery, another good reason to get someone out of office. Or other high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes is the level of the official, not the level of the crime. You can also remove a president upon impeachment and conviction for usurpations of power. And you can refer to Federalist Papers 66 and 77. Misdemeanor isn't just a lower level crime. It's actually, again, defined in Webster's 1828 dictionary as ill behavior, evil conduct, fault, and mismanagement. So if you get a president in who is just an absolutely abysmal manager who ruins everything he touches, that's actually reason to get him out of office. And that's pretty much it. Got questions? Comments? I'm using anecdotes. Do you have that report ready yet? Okay.